Welcome to Convo Heals, the transformative mental health podcast.
We're three remarkable women from diverse backgrounds.
Join forces to harness the incredible healing power of conversation.
Each season, we embark on a journey
of exploration, empathy, and shared experiences
to illuminate the profound impact that thoughtful dialogue can have on our lives.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Convo Heals. Thank you so much for choosing this conversation with us today. I'm Dr. Erika Bachnick.
Dr. Brandi in the building.
And Dr. Raveau.
And this is episode 1 of our first season. This season is going to be all about parenting. And in episode 1, we're going to talk about it. What is parenting whole? What does it mean? We've got coming up the science, the practice, and the wisdom. You can listen to each segment on its own and you'll get something great out of it, or the whole thing as one conversation. So let's go. Let's get started. Parenting whole. What does it mean to us, ladies? What does it mean to parent whole?
You start.
Well, when I think of that, parenting whole, it means I am really present as who I am. I'm not thinking about parenting as if-then, right? I do this, the kid acts this way. I think about myself as a human in a relationship, building something with my kids.
What I appreciate about this particular topic and that we're talking about it is I don't know if anybody I know consciously thinks about parenting whole. Like as a whole human, like the wholeness of our identities. I feel like I've kind of been conditioned once you become a mom, your whole identity is a mom. You're a mom. You're no longer a woman. You're no longer, these other intersecting aspects of your identity. You're a parent. Your mom. Your name is mom. How often do you go to the school and they don't even know your name? They just know you as the kid's mom. So the idea of parenting whole, I don't think is something we talk about in a conscious way very much. So I'm glad we're doing that.
You know, it's interesting because you're saying, too, that it feels like to parent whole is to be all of your identities,
Yes.
all of who you are. And my immediate reaction to that I actually want to really think about is being a mom really is my favorite identity. Being a Jewish mom. I mean, I always tell you guys, I am a Jewish mom in literally everything I do, even if it's not with my kids. That there's that maternal spirit that I like to define my identity that way. But it's interesting what you're saying, that I think for a lot of people it feels like momming is this whole other thing where you maybe feel invisible. You feel like some part of you got left behind.
Well, and a part of, I think, what makes me that brings richness is connected to the other parts of who I was before I became a mom.
That's right.
And,
That's right.
But I think when you say the word parenting, for the average person, the emotion it elicits is anxiety,
stress,
right? And or annoyance or fatigue. And so if that's the emotion that is associated with the doing, because for the average person, parenting is something you do. Becoming a parent is something you check off. And then the act of it is something you do. There isn't a culture around the being, which starts with the relationship with the self, which no one really talks about or teaches us really when we're growing up.
I just really want to amplify what you're saying, that we are going to talk about parenting as being and not doing, right? And that's going to be a big mind shift for a lot of people.
Yeah. And women are so good at the doing. We are the problem solvers. We're the fixers. We keep things together. And to some extent, we all need assistance with the being for many reasons.
Okay, so here's my question that I think is on people's hearts as they hear this, I think. How have you decided that you're enough by being in your children's lives and not based on what you do? Because I imagine if you can do it, you've decided that.
I think for me, joy and laughter is everything. Like when I can be silly and funny and dance and be playful and we are sharing that moment, that's what they're going to remember, and that's what feeds my soul, right? It's when I'm like fully present, and it's feeding their soul. So for me, it really is about those moments.
Well, so like
do you think of
Hasti
this?
is saying she's really tuned in to how her children receive her.
Yeah.
She's flexible in some ways to notice some things I do matter so much. The laughter, the joy, that dance. And maybe some other things aren't having the impact that I expected. And so she's paying attention to that. So that's one way that she's like, I know that I am enough by being present.
Like no matter what, at the end of the day, we can laugh and we can sing and we can dance, no matter what.
I love that. You're making me think of, and this I think is part of the wisdom. You're making me think of the real popular who am I thinking of? Maya Angelou quote. It's not what people said or what they did, but how they make you feel that you remember it. You're making me think of that and how creating that kind of energetic, element in your home is kind of the most notable aspect of parenting. I don't know. I think for me, and this is similar to that, I really thrive on creating and just really leaning into these and you know this about me. We've talked about this a lot. Just real intimacy, like real connection, real intimacy, real curiosity. Those are the most rich experiences. It's not the discipline. It's not the rules. I'm not saying they shouldn't exist, but it's really not that. It's not the teaching or the educating or the redirecting. It's really been the connecting, the like real curious moments of intimacy. And sometimes they do include humor and fun and play, but sometimes they're tears and sometimes they're, I think those are the moments.
What about you, Erika?
I think what I'm connecting to, what this is making me think about, is that maybe this is true for you. I think for me, I'm willing to experiment. I'm a scientist. I'm willing to do a thing, notice the results, and learn from it. And if I'm being really honest, my strengths as a person, and especially as a mother, are not in the doing. I'm late a lot, and I forget things. I'm not a great cook, you guys. I'm just not.
You can cook a little bit.
I'm all right. I'm all right. Listen, I'm all right. But what I'm really, really good at is loving people. I've my whole life carried around like a basket of love to give. And I waited for these people to come into my life that were the right people to just shower with my love. And so I feel like the best of myself when I'm with my kids. And I know that's probably not true for absolutely everybody, because everybody has different strengths. And some people, I have lots of friends who are so good at the doing. They're so good. Yeah. They're the people I rely on to remember when permission slips are due and that sort of stuff. But it's been really healing for me, actually, to become a mother and to find out just being who I am. Someone full of love. Sometimes it's awkward. Sometimes it's sparkling and amazing. My creativity is a gift I give my kids, and I can see that they're wrapped up in it. And when I see that, that's the experiment, right? Then I'm like, oh, that matters. I'm paying attention to that. There's lots of ways to do the doing.
But I do want to acknowledge, too, like just say explicitly that none of us are perfect at parenting.
No.
Like there is no perfection at parenting. You know, and if the way we're even talking about it, we're using a verb. We're using so there is a doing in a sense, but it seems like we're just amplifying the fact that the value, the anchor, is in really connecting to our sense of humanness and our being, and bringing that being the forefront. of the relationship. So how are we organizing Convo Heals? Because I think there's a lot of magic in even that.
Yes.
The science,
Yes.
Tell the folks.
Yes. So what we're bringing to you with every episode is you're going to get the science, the wisdom, and the practice. And the reason we're breaking it down that way is because we know that you are exposed to so many conversations about mental health and parenting from all kinds of sources out there. And we've been studying parenting and mental health and child development for a lot of years. We have 3 PhDs here, a lot of years as therapists practicing, a lot of years together actually as research scientists, studying all the things. And what we bring to you is the idea that the ways that we frame parenting and mental health broadly come from lots of places.
Yes.
There's a wonderful body of scientific research. And we're going to try our best to distill that down for you in the section on the science so you get information you need. And it will also help, I hope, contextualize a lot of what's coming at you on social media, where people might say, this one study said, and so we're all doing this new thing because of this one study. We're going to try to give you a better understanding of what the whole science, the whole body says. But the scientific research, especially in the psychological sciences, in child development, in the parenting research, it is framed by largely white voices, white-centric voices, Western voices, and it's mostly descended from Greek philosophers still. And actually, this is not the best of what the world has to offer us in terms of cultural wisdoms about being human. We've been parenting for a lot longer than we've been really accessing this developmental psychology research, which is actually quite young. So we want to talk about the wisdoms and how you can tap into your own cultural wisdoms, your own families, and know that those are important sources of information. And then finally, we get to talking and we could have this conversation about the science and the cultural wisdoms. We could do this all night, but we want you to walk away from this conversation with clear practice ideas, new habits you can build, ways of really operationalizing this conversation we're having in your lives to be well.
I'm with it.
Yes.
We really believe the conversation is what heals. It's not this exercise, that strategy, that behavior coaching. It's about creating that ongoing dialogue with the people in your life who matter most to you.
And as you listen, notice two moments where something one of us or all of us say that activate inside of you and pay attention to that because that is key. It's telling you something that is meaningful for you. And what might be meaningful for you might not be meaningful for others.
Yes. I have learned so much from talking with you, Hasti, about paying attention to that kind of little voice inside me, those instincts. It's so important. The podcast is the Convo Heals. Season 1, we are talking about parenting whole. And in this first episode, we're talking about what parenting is. How do we define it? How do we think about it? I'm the data geek. I'm the research scientist, and I'm going to talk to you a bit about what does the research say about what parenting is. And first, what I want to talk about, because I'm also a little cranky, you guys, I want to talk about how we're getting the science wrong out in the world, the public discourse. This is a big reason I really leapt out of academia, and I'm here in this world in social media and podcasting because there was a translation problem I could see. There's all this stuff online, and for better or for worse, we're all getting our information about parenting and mental health from the online conversation going on. And there's just not enough of a bridge between the latest science and what real parents are getting. And one of the problems that everybody should know is that developmental psychology research is quite young as a science. It's really a conversation truly among research scientists. Somebody publishes a study. We learn from how they did the study. What questions did they ask? What techniques did they use to experiment or get information from folks, and what conclusions did they draw? And then somebody else will say, I think there's some problems here. Let me repeat this study. Let me do it differently. Let me respond to it. It really is a conversation, but the internet loves, clarity, a meme, a couple of sentences. And so often you'll see in the online world this one study said, you have to fill your child's room with only the color blue because blue is really important for brain growth in this one region.
Or no more than 15 toys.
Oh, no more than 15 toys.
Because then their creativity is going to be gone.
Yes.
And what that meme can't tell you is all the ways that conclusion is limited. It is specific for one group of kids who may have when they come into the study, they may have a specific mental health challenge that's trying to be solved. There's lots of limitations to this.
But anxious parents want black and white answers.
Yeah.
They're asking you, tell me exactly how many toys should I buy?
Tell me exactly how to be a good parent.
Yes.
And how to make sure my kid is successful. So
yes, so they can feel like they did not fail, because that feeling is so uncomfortable for people.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're naming is in many ways a problem with what we really can draw from the science, because it's new. We are continuing to figure out how to study and understand humans, because development is created and informed by so many things in the world. It's never just one thing you do as a parent. I actually hope that's really freeing for folks listening. Your children's outcomes will never be the result of one thing. And that's actually why the science is very challenging, because there's so many things that are constantly, your kids are swirling in all the time. Children are the product of, first of all, patterns over time. So when you think about what kind of impact you can make as a parent, you think about what's really repeated over time. And they're the product of influences beyond you, right? So there's that. That's important first. The other thing is that even though the science is young and it's evolving and we really want to think about it in complex ways, still, we have several decades under our belts. And there very much are some things, when you look at the whole science, not just one study or another study, when you look at the whole body of research, what do we seem to believe is scientifically true about what matters about parenting? So I want to talk about 3 areas. I think these are the 3 areas. I hope this gives parents that kind of like semi-black and white, do this, this, and this. But listen, you out there listening, you got to partner with us, because I'm going to give you really some broad categories. And when we move into the wisdom, when we move into the practice, is where you're going to really think about operationalizing.
Yeah, play with the dimensions of gray.
Yeah. Are you up for it?
Absolutely.
Okay. So there's I'm going to give you first the 3 broad strokes. What parenting is protection, emotion socialization, and creating a sense of belongingness. So let's unpack each of those a little bit and talk about them. The first is protection. Now, something cool that is scientifically derived is really a belief, a theory in some ways. This would be hard to prove. But anthropologists believe that humans had a longer fetal period at one point in our history.
Okay.
But that a shortened fetal period is responsible for the incredible evolution and innovation that humans have shown, which is really kind of the, like, what makes us so different from other species, is that rapid evolution and innovation and invention. And scientists believe that the reason that was even possible is because fetal development shortened and the human brain was able to grow on the outside of the woman's body, and thus it had more space to grow. It didn't need to get through the birth canal. It could grow and get bigger. And that's only possible, a shortened fetal period, because human beings, especially mothers, nurture babies for such a long period of time. We have the longest period of infancy, right? Like horses are born and they get up and start walking pretty soon. Right. Human babies need to be protected and cared for. So that protection is truly basic, fundamental about survival, physical needs, and it matters for all of us as an ecosystem. But I want to hear from you guys when you hear the word protection, because it means so much more. What do you hear? How do you think about protection as parents?
I mean, the most natural and immediate reaction when I hear protection is obviously safety. I mean, that's just the most rapid association I have with protection. Yeah. Because it's not, I don't experience it internally as like a doing of sorts or a control, but more of like just a sense of calm, comfort, safe. I just associate it with safety.
So like the energy, that energy you bring to the children.
I mean, think about it. Even if you're talking about infancy in a child, we have all these stories around the way you kind of exhibit or translate a sense of safety or a sense of protection, even in just your facial expression. Yes. Like you can elicit a sense of that even in moments and spaces where you're really not that safe if you have that. Like if I look at my toddler that's running around on the floor and they fall and I'm like, But if I'm looking at you and I'm just like, there's a sense of safety in that and a protectiveness. So it made me think of that in a more literal form.
And to some extent, research confirms that when traumatic events happen, what really, to some extent, predicts the children's outcomes is the energy in which parents held in that moment. Were they working hard to be the captain of the ship saying, it's going to be okay, we will get through this? Or were they unable to do that for a variety of reasons, and did they fall apart? And
it's not a dismissiveness. I think that's an important distinction. It's not a dismissiveness or a kind of like, get over it. It's not that. It's the holding in a way. I feel like.
And I think also what you're speaking to, this is a really great example when we say it's the conversation that heals.
Yeah.
In a moment when something happens to your child and you want to impart that energy, we're going to get through this. We are in this together. That has to be trustworthy to your child. In lower stakes moments, that has to be what the conversation sounds like to achieve that kind of safety. But what we're also talking about here is that when we talk about protection as a fundamental characteristic of what parenting is, it's shape-shifting in a way based on what the immediate risks are for any given child. There's no universal set of behaviors in some ways.
When I think about protection as an immigrant mother, I think about two words come to my mind: advocacy and skills building in my children. So I think I have to really advocate for them in different settings, especially raising a child with special needs. How do I make sure the world knows I am watching you and you are not going to hurt my child because my child is different? And how am I going to give my kids the strategies they need to advocate and self-protect? Like my mind right away goes to that. It doesn't go to more basic needs like shelter and food and getting the bills paid. It's more of that cultural, social safety.
That's right.
And even within internal family safety around intergenerational trauma, it also activates that for me. Like I need to protect my children from the intergenerational trauma within my family.
So the next category, and this is, I think, what you're describing as a segue, because this is about emotional processes, another really important aspect of what parents do is to socialize emotions. Now, here is where this sort of behavior coaching thing has kind of flooded our airways, as though that's parenting, is coaching behavior. Really sorry, guys, it's not. We do it.
It's not?
No, I'm sorry. Behavior coaching can be how you get through a moment in a day, but it's not nurturing, growing a human.
It's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable.
To maintain a relationship.
Yeah. Emotion socialization, though, is the broader idea of how we teach our children to use emotional information. So emotions are information. It's how we connect to the world around us. It's like a spidey sense.
Yes.
You just feel a thing. You know something. You can start making meaning and make a choice for your behavior based on that information. How do we do that as parents? This also is very culturally and contextually embedded.
Absolutely.
It's very much connected even to protection, because how do we teach them to use emotional information in ways that will keep them safe and healthy? Before we started talking today, we were having actually a great conversation about how children from minoritized backgrounds likely have more complex and broader patterns of emotion socialization even in earlier childhood, because it is for their safety and for their wellness that we need our children to be able to read a room,
Yeah.
Yes.
right? Understand how they feel and make smart decisions based on that information.
And for me, it's that moment within a family where they make a commitment, I think, through conversation or subconsciously, on what is going to be the family's culture and values around emotions.
Can you give an example of that?
Yes. So, for example, my son, Levi, because his brain is wired differently, he expresses a lot of anger. And I had this moment within myself where I made a contract with me to say, it's okay. We are safe even when he is angry. I don't have to fix anything. I am going to change our family's culture around this emotion. But it was a conscious decision I made. And then forever, things kind of changed for us.
How do you then navigate that choice up against the fact that everybody else may not be doing that in the world? You talked about a part of the protection is the advocacy for him in the world. So then how does that work?
I think I am privileged in the sense that he has this sense that within certain settings, it is not okay, and he needs to regulate in a different way. And so, for example,
that's that duality of
That's
awareness.
the socialization.
Yes, that at school, for example, he cannot have that reaction. He cannot let it out. He has to hold it in. But that when he comes home, it's a different dynamic. But I think if he didn't fall in that category, if he was one of those kids who couldn't do that, just like all the other ways, I would put on my advocacy hat on, and I would be sending the teacher and the school social worker resources on why he's not trying to be difficult.
But I think you're speaking to what we were saying, again, offline, around the double consciousness, the dual consciousness. Like that kind of sophisticated nature of delineating in this space, this expression of my experience is it's safer to do it here than it is to do it here. And that's a very sophisticated socialization for our kids. So
It's sophisticated, but what I also want to say about it is that it's normative.
true.
It's
Yes.
straightforward. It doesn't actually take a lot of complex thought.
It's not special.
No.
It's
right.
sophisticated, but it's not special.
Right.
It's complex, but it's not special in that way.
Yes. They become more sophisticated.
Yeah.
But all parents can do this.
Yes.
And it really will front load the practice a little bit here. It's about really being transparent yourself. Starting that conversation all day, all the time around them. This is what I feel. This is what I believe. This is what I'm thinking about. Letting them in on your internal world is a way we socialize how they make sense of their own feelings.
I've got some things to say about that.
I know you do. You want to say them now? You want to wait till we get to practice?
I think it actually connects to the wisdom,
Okay.
which I'm really excited to get into, because I think that in and of itself can compromise the safety. And so having to navigate that, the way I was raised was you can't show your cards that way. That will be used against you. You can't show your cards that way. Your children will not respect you. Right?
By the children.
By the children, and really, quite frankly, anyone else.
So anyone else to me is still how we say to the kids, this is the socialization process. Right. In the home, this is how we express and how we're there for each other and what's kind of embraced here. And there's different ways to regulate, so to speak. There's different ways to take in the emotional information, hold it, understand it, and then in a context-specific way, maintain safety and wellness. But you're really speaking to how that can reverberate back.
And I don't think that means not to do it. I think that's a part of the consciousness around this. I mean, I navigate in a similar way in my home. I think it's really important for them to bear witness to the wide range of my humanity, like all of my feelings and all of my emotions. So you know language around that. So you know how to differentiate, you know, how you're experiencing the world. But I also know that, you know, being raised in a very intergenerational home with Black and brown people that grew up in the era of the Depression, or they grew up in the era of, you know, Jim Crow, that there was a huge compromising element to that. So that was not a part of, in an effort to maintain a sense of safety and an effort to maintain a sense of order in the home, you cannot be dysregulated out loud like that.
But I would make the argument that this idea of making sure your children respect you has a lot less to do with the relationship within the home than the sense of safety in the community.
Absolutely.
Because if people perceive your family as a family where you couldn't raise your kids to respect you, I think for a lot of cultures, it would reduce your resources. And so there was a lot of hypervigilance around how people are perceiving that dynamic. Because if you can't raise respectful kids,
then you can't be respected.
Then you cannot. Then you cannot be respected,
Yes.
and you cannot be trusted, and you cannot be associated with.
Exactly.
So we're actually moving into this other part of parenting that I don't actually think gets talked about nearly enough, but the research evidence is clear, especially in the family systems literature, that what parents and families do for their children is establish belongingness. And so this is not this movement about gentle parenting or whatever it's called now, attachment parenting, whatever we're calling it. It's not about tone or approach. Belongingness sometimes may not even be very polite, right? Belongingness is not just about feeling safe necessarily. Belongingness is the full expression, meaning understanding of who I am and the impacts I make in the world, the potential for impacts, good, bad, neutral, the ways that others impact me. It is really about wholeness, about socializing in our children wholeness and what values we want them to hold on to, who we want them to understand themselves to be. A place where this research actually is extremely rich is in the ethno-racial socialization literature, specifically by Black scholars. Coming to mind right now are Dr. Rihanna Anderson, a friend of ours, who talks about racial socialization in Black families. And what we know from the science is that that positive promotion of identity in our kids is one of the best, if not the best, buffer, sources of resilience against stress. It is the most important cornerstone of their mental health, is that sense of belongingness that we establish in our families.
And I think what you're seeing a lot right now is parents wanting to make sure that their kids feel like they belong. But I think what I'm hearing you say, something that is even equally as critical, is that, and others also belong, and you're responsible for that.
There's a proverb. It's an African proverb, Ubuntu. I am because we are, and we are because I am. This kind of communal, collectivist orientation to the value of community, and that it brings about a sense of responsibility, but then also a sense of pride, and it doesn't always feel good, but it is good.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm raising Jewish children, and I've talked with you guys extensively about the fact that having them know who they are, who they come from, that they are responsible to a whole community in their lives, our future, our past, is a gift. And I know that it creates what we call emotional residue for them to weather stress, but also it's not always easy. It means being an upstander. It means being your whole self in places where people are not going to want to know your whole self. But in balance, this is mental wellness. So that's the science on parenting. I want everyone to really think about investing in belongingness, emotion socialization practices, and your sense of protection and how that plays out. Coming up next, the wisdom.
Okay, so Erika, Dr. Bachnick, since you have laid out all of the scientific kind of considerations as we look at parenting, I want to dig into the wisdom because I'm of the perspective that our cultural, collective, intergenerational contributions really kind of help direct, amplify, strengthen, enrich our parenting practices. And we all bring so much wealth of knowledge from our intersecting identities that how can you not talk about the wisdom? How can you not pull from your great grandmother's, traditions? So tell me, when it comes to the lessons learned around curating a sense of safety, a sense of belonging, a sense of this almost like emotional intelligence in a way with our children, where does it come? Where do you get it from? Where does it come from? What stories resonate in your home? How does this look in your home? I'll tell you, in my home, raised by my grandmother and my grandfather, there was such an essence around work ethic, around love, like you talk about how values emerge in a family, around love, work ethic, around fun, around spirituality. Those were kind of the anchors of the home. And I'd love to share more about that, but I want to hear from you guys. Like, what are the cultural nuggets of wisdom that influence the way you parent?
Well, I think for me, growing up in Iran and in the Iranian culture, a lot of it was around community and being around family and being together and around food.
Oh, yes, the food.
Yes,
I miss the food.
And music.
Yes.
But also a bit of like, everybody has their eyes on everybody on how everyone's doing and not thinking that you can tap out. Like, you all feel responsible for each other no matter what. And
How was that taught?
well, my dad's family, he's one of 8 boys, and my grandmother passed away from cancer when she was like 42. And these 8 boys were really left protecting and caring for each other. And I think the way that my grandfather kept things together was to instill that within them. You are responsible for each other. You are a unit. Nothing is more important than the 8 of you. He would consistently tell them that. And I think about my mom's family, and her dad passed away when she was young, leaving my grandma as a single mom. And I think back in the day, she was an only child, my grandmother, and she didn't have a lot of family. And then her husband passes and she had 8 kids. Like, that was a big responsibility.
Yeah.
Right. So I think the idea of coming together and feeling responsible for everybody, they would just directly say it to them.
These were the mottos, the family mottos.
Yeah, and you don't have the luxury of going away for college or going and doing this or messing with that girl or whatever. You have 7 brothers that you have to keep your eyes on.
Whenever I feel like we're talking about, whether we're talking about the science or we're talking about cultural wisdom, I don't really want to name it this way, but like the cost benefit analysis, the nuggets and the consequences, the struggle and the prize. Like, what are the? I think there's a great sense of community, but then I also have been connected to families where they felt really restricted as it related to their sense of creativity or what they could go aspire to be or what their ambitions can be. Does that make sense?
It does. And, I've talked with you a lot about this recently as I'm really trying to understand my Jewish identity as a mother and who I'm raising and to be as intentional about it as I can. And I think you just can't get around the fact that parenting children who have minoritized identities means that you are parenting against oppression.
Whether you know it or not.
Right. And
Right.
so we are trauma informed in ways that we can't just think ourselves out of. Doesn't mean that we're trauma informed and so we have to get over our trauma. It's ongoing, it's real, and actually it's strength, it's learning in some ways. This is real. And so for me, when I think about how the cultural wisdoms become part of how I parent, I mostly lean into the beauty of being Jewish, that I am raising children who know joy because Jewish people celebrate everything. We have so many holidays and everyone is filled with the most delicious foods. There's no talk of calories or too much sugar. Everything has plenty of that. And there's music and dancing, and we are loud, and we live in extended family networks. And when our community gets together, there's so much joy. And I connect with what you're saying, that there's this responsibility we have to one another because we're a small people. And that's the oppression in some ways, right? That we have to raise children who are responsible to the community. But I think that's really beautiful to raise people who have that kind of depth in the world. And Jewish people are always on the run. And even though in my lifetime I haven't been, we live with that kind of fire under us. So it's like the beauty and the joy of being Jewish is that we work hard and we study hard and we love hard. And part of it is because we have this sense all the time that life is so short and this life is fragile. So I could talk about it that way. But I guess what I'm saying is it's not a binary. Right?
Yes.
It's like all of it makes us who we are.
It's so beautiful too, in a way. It's kind of like we use these terms like tragedy into triumph, or this kind of orientation to being triumphant and being liberated and being an overcomer, or whatever, like how we use this language to amplify the fact that yes, some of these cultural notions of existence are birthed out of an oppressive world, but that doesn't make them any less valuable. There's no pity in it. It's like very pride orienting too. Yeah, you're making me think of the science that you were sharing around. I mean, you both are telling stories around belonging, like how belonging is curated. It wasn't a checklist. It's like these messages that are just passed down implicitly or explicitly.
Protection.
Yeah, and protection. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think at the most fundamental level, here's a really good example, I think, of how the wisdom plays out in the everyday. As therapists, parents ask us all the time, how do I help my child navigate the fraught social environment of adolescence? And I am raising now an almost teen, a new teen, in a complicated social environment. And what I've always said to all my kids their whole lives, and I feel like I'm really kind of like, what's the expression, like harvesting the fruit of this now, is that whatever happens outside these doors, you belong here. You belong here.
You always have home.
Yes. And you are magical. You shine your light out in the world, and some people aren't going to receive it.
Yes.
And that's for them, right? You be you everywhere you go. here in this home, we see you. And so now he goes out in the world, and I see that playing out, that he has that kind of distancing in some ways from things that could be hurtful.
But that's something that you consciously brought within your family. Not everybody has that. I'm reflecting on the emotional socialization piece that we were talking about. And within my culture and my family, how emotions were socialized is that regardless of how you feel, you suck it up, you keep it together, and you move forward and you do what you should do. And I remember for a very long time living with this mindset of like, if everybody did what they should do, everything would be so much easier, and really not being in touch with any way I felt, right? Lots of energy up in the head. And I think there is a lot of grief for this younger generation around how maybe their parents raised them that way. But that was adaptive at that point within that culture. If it wasn't, those parents would have not done that. It was necessary. And I think shifting away from the parents are the devil, right? They are the abusers, to why was that necessary for them to socialize us in that way? It goes back to what you said, the curiosity piece.
Yeah, but what you're talking about is you're referencing what I was commenting on earlier, like how threatening and how compromising for some of my ancestry and the folks that raised me to have the luxury of expressing emotion in that way or being connected to emotion in that way. That was threatening at a time. So, yeah, you're really speaking to that.
You know, a year ago, I moved into my own house, became a single mom in a primarily white neighborhood, privileged neighborhood. And I noticed I would get so anxious as I was adjusting to getting the kids out of the house in the morning, and both kids are crying. I would feel a lot of anxiety. And the story in my head was, they're going to think the brown woman has come to the neighborhood with her out of control children, and they are not to be messed with. They are not going to be safe. And that story in my head was really distressing. And it was really pushing me to emotionally socialize my kids at any cost possible to keep it together. And because of my background and my education and my training and the support and the years of therapy, I was able to have a different conversation with myself and say, that's not necessary. If that was to happen, you can keep your family safe, right? You don't need to shut them up. But like, what about the average parent who doesn't have that? It can be so hard to keep socializing the same way, even when it's no longer necessary.
What's so lovely about this segment or this aspect of Convo Heals is we're describing the lived experience of some of these conflicts or struggles. But I feel like the answer is in the cultural wisdom too. Like the answer is there as well. The challenge is there. The intergenerational disruption is there. Like what we needed in our culture, in our home 25, 40, 50 years ago, maybe we don't need it in that way this time, in this way, at this time. But reconfiguring and finding our new answers is just as much in the cultural wisdom as it is in the science. And I think that's what's so exciting. So I imagine people are listening and thinking, oh, my family has had to navigate a similar thing. Yeah. So where can you derive your new path or refine your path while thinking about the cultural wisdom of your family? It's not always outside of us.
That's being whole.
Yes.
That's parenting whole.
Yes, absolutely. Well, with all that said, the value of the science and the wisdom is always embedded in the practice. So like on a tangible, palpable level, what does this look like in our homes?
I think for me, practice is about a lifelong commitment to having a dialogue with myself.
what does it sound like, Hasti? Tell us.
How do you start that if you've never
Like,
done
what
it?
does that sound like? So are you in the car, like, talking out loud? Like, what are you saying?
I think it's a lot of it is like I made a commitment to myself to tune in and to say, what was that about?
Yes.
Tell me more. Like I've been doing that a lot in the past year. Something that shifted for me a year ago is I think, and Erika knows this about me, I lived a life like really for the service of others, and my identity was wrapped around that. And I thought I would think if I die, what is one person for everybody else? And what happened for me a year ago was like, no, like I'm also one person and I matter and I am going to do this because I'm important, not so that anybody else is going to benefit from it. Versus in the past, I would have maybe done it because somehow it was going to lead to mentoring somebody better or parenting my children better, right? And I just said, you are important and you deserve peace. And kind of slowing down and saying, well, hey, what's going on? It really goes back to that self-compassion. But I'm so committed to it. It's a non-negotiable for me now.
What sticks out so much to me, and I'm so proud of it, is it is your solution to exactly what you described earlier about if everybody just sucks it up and does what they have to do, then it would be better. And you're kind of saying, this is what I have to do for me now. So it's kind of the same thing, but in a different way.
And I think historically I would have maybe done it in some way so that it would lead to something. But now I do it because it's the right thing to do. It is the right way of treating myself. And I noticed that by living through that, it has these really beautiful ripple effects on everything else, on my children, on how I run my business, on my relationships with my friends, on even doing some ancestral healing, letting go, grieving, forgiving.
I've been having some wild experiences that I don't think I've fully made sense of because we're talking about parenting and parenting whole, but we can't forget that we're adult children. We're adult children. So it's not just, this is a whole kind of conversation, not just our role in our children's lives, but also how we're holding our childhood as adults. Yeah. And I am caregiving, as many people know, for my 84-year-old grandmother who's very, very ill. And when you talk about that ancestral healing, I had an experience where my grandmother has been very kind of disconnected or detached from her emotion and herself for her whole life. Because like many women of her age and of her generation, her role and her value in the world was to take care of her children and her grandchildren. And so things like, are you okay? Or how do you feel? She really could never answer even. And now in her final kind of stages of life, I'm asking her, does that hurt or how do you feel? And she can't answer me. And the way it comes out is an irritability in a sense. And one day she's crying, I'm crying, my kids are crying, and she's kind of yelling at me, which is not her nature. And I look at my grandmother and I said, Gammy, I think we're all having a hard time. And I said, I'm really overwhelmed. And I said, how are you? And she says, I'm fine. I said, I don't think you're fine. I think you're really worn out, and I think you're really tired, and I think you're really uncomfortable. And instead of yelling at me, maybe you could just say that. Do you know, Gammy says, I think I'm uncomfortable. I think I'm really uncomfortable. It's such a powerful experience to have when you talk about ancestral healing. I think that's what it looks like.
One thing I really love about that story that I hope people take to heart is that healing is lifelong. Yeah. We are not finished products just because we have children. Yes. This idea, again, coming from this conversation, I think, out in the world, is that parents have to show up calm, like
unmoved,
suppressed. And that's not very human, and our kids can't find us in there.
Yes.
That can be really frightening, actually.
Yes.
Not all yelling is abuse. And there is a kind of emotional neglect in trying to be not emotionally present and working through it and letting our children, just like you are with your grandmother, be part of the healing, part of the conversation. That repair isn't just about perfecting the thing that happened. It's not just like buttoning it up. It's like, it's a cycle. It's a process that we're inviting our children into that dance.
Well, you're saying also it's not avoiding either.
Right.
It's not like it's not a void of your humanity.
Right.
It's all of it. We keep talking about about parenting whole.
Well, what we haven't talked about yet is that that keeps coming to my mind too today is we keep talking about parenting whole and how do we get there. But for me, a big part of the practice is remembering I'm parenting whole children. And that means I want to borrow a metaphor from a researcher. Her name is Dr. Alison Gopnik. She wrote this fabulous book. It's one of the only parenting books I like and I recommend. It's called The Gardener and the Carpenter. And the metaphor is that we sort of believe, based on all the ways we socialize ourselves, all the ways that whiteness frames the conversation about parenting, that parenting is like carpentry. And that if you just had access to the manual, we're all getting the same lumber, you could build the same house. And that's what we're always trying to keep up with. But what she says, after a lifetime of being a very prolific researcher and now a mom and a grandma, is that really it's more like being a gardener. The seeds get planted. You can't control the weather. You can't control all the elements in the soil. You plant one flower on one side of the garden, the same seeds on the other side of the garden, and they fare in totally different ways. And so then what your job becomes is getting more nutrients into the soil, trying to plan for the weather as best as you can, cutting back weeds, cultivating, noticing the beauty of the flower you get. It's all these things, right? So this practice for me, noticing my flowers, has been one of the most powerful habits, actually, about their wholeness. They're going to grow as they're growing, and I have to keep up with it. I have to keep recalibrating, adapting to who they are. And my job is not to control who they are, who they become. It's to think harder about noticing them. And sometimes it starts as small as really having like a daily practice of observation. What do I notice today about my child? What am I wondering about? Sometimes I say to my kids, I just was wondering what's in your head. What did you think about all day? I just was wondering. Sometimes they have an answer and sometimes they don't, but I'm starting that practice for us both of wondering and being curious about one another. And it reminds me then in the hard moments where I have this kind of knee-jerk, like, I got to fix it, I got to do something. It helps me remember in the hard moments, they're a whole person with their own intentions and thoughts and feelings. And what would it mean for me to be whole here too? And for us not to be carpenter house.
I think for so many people, what makes that practice doable for them is by parenting within a community of other adults who are curious in getting to know your child. Because I think as a parent, when you're so busy with the doing, especially if you struggle with anxiety and you are trying to fix it all, it can be really hard to have a really limited lens. And I think having others around who are not the parent, but they're invested in getting to know your child as a whole, loving your child as a whole, because they see that child as worthy of having a relationship with, they will have a lot of wisdom for you. And they'll help you if you are open to having conversations with them, which a lot of parents avoid because they're wrapped up in their shame. And they avoid asking, what are you thinking? What are your thoughts? Because they feel like I should know my child. I should be doing it on my own. Right? And they isolate.
And the shame associated with the value of influence. Like allowing influence doesn't mean that I don't know anything or that I'm inept, or it's really just help. It's another form of belonging to invite influence from someone else in a way that doesn't have to feel threatening.
Well, I hope as we kind of wrap up here the practice that this will give folks some new habits they can start adopting at home, some ways. I sometimes think the biggest change you can make really is shifting your stance, your positioning. And so I hope we gave that today in this conversation, but it's always an ongoing conversation. And we really hope that folks are going to interact with us, message us, interact with us on social media, tell us what you're thinking about. How can we tailor the conversation in ways that support you at home?
The Convo doesn't stop here. For links to the resources and research mentioned in today's episode, head on over to the show notes at convoheals.com/1. That's convoheals.com/1.